The day my daughter married without inviting me was the same day she began telling people my lake house would soon belong to her. I found out about the wedding from a photograph posted by a florist I had never met. There was my only child in a white dress beneath oak trees covered in Spanish moss, smiling beside a man who had shaken my hand 6 months earlier and promised to treat me like family. 130 guests stood behind them. My seat did not exist. 3 days later, my daughter called and said the ceremony had been too emotional for me after losing her mother. 2 weeks later, she asked whether I had updated my will. By Thanksgiving, she and go. Her husband arrived at my table carrying floor plans for turning my lake property into a wedding venue. They spoke about my workshop as though I were already dead. My daughter touched my arm and said, "Dad, you have had your life. It is time to think about ours." I looked at the framed photograph of her mother on the mantle, then at the child I had spent 35 years protecting from every consequence, and finally understood that love had made me generous, but fear had made me easy to use. My name is Walter Bennett. I was 66 when I learned that being someone's father did not require becoming their inheritance while still alive. I live outside Asheville, North Carolina, in a modest brick bungalow near the French Broad River. The house has 2 bedrooms, a narrow front porch, and a kitchen small enough that opening the dishwasher blocks the refrigerator. I moved there after my wife Diane died because our larger family home felt less like shelter and more like a museum where every object accused me of surviving her. The place everyone in my family cared about, however, was not the bungalow. It was Willow Ridge, a 40-acre property overlooking Lake Lure with a cedar lodge, a detached woodworking studio, a stone guest cottage, and enough mountain view to make strangers lower their voices when they stepped onto the back deck. I bought the land when I was 29, before the lake became fashionable and before developers began turning every quiet hillside into luxury rentals. The lodge started as a 2-room cabin Diane and I built with friends, borrowed tools and money saved inside coffee cans. Over 30 years, I expanded it board by board. I added bedrooms when our daughter, Caroline, was born. I built the stone fireplace after Diane complained that the first winter nearly froze us. I planted apple trees, repaired the dock, and spent more weekends covered in sawdust than sitting beside the water. Willow Ridge was not simply valuable property. It was the map of our marriage. Caroline learned to swim there, lost her first tooth there, and once hid beneath the porch for 3 hours because Diane told her she could not keep a stray kitten. We found her asleep beside the kitten with one hand gripping its collar. I kept the cat. Diane always said Caroline could make me surrender with one look. She was right for longer than either of us understood. I spent 38 years building a respected custom cabinetry company from one truck and a rented shop. I lived simply, reinvested carefully, and retired with security rather than glamour. Diane handled our books, knew every employee's birthday, and refused to let me fire a young apprentice simply because he showed up late after sleeping in his car. "Ask why before you decide who he is," she told me. That apprentice, Marcus Green, eventually became my shop manager and later bought the company when I retired. Caroline grew up seeing me provide. I paid for school, college, a car, and the Atlanta apartment she used while beginning an event planning career. Each rescue felt loving to me and normal to her. Caroline met Preston Hale at a resort industry conference in Nashville. He managed luxury vacation properties for investors and spoke about houses as though they were chess pieces. Preston was polished, attentive, and always seemed to know the price of something before he knew its history. The first time he visited Willow Ridge, he stood on the deck, scanned the shoreline, and said, "This place is severely underleveraged." Diane had been dead only 8 months. I told him it was a home, not an asset. He smiled and said, "Of course, Walter. I mean eventually." That word remained with me, eventually. Preston disguised desire as concern, repeatedly asking whether the land was too much for my age and whether it should remain in the family. Carolyn defended him. "He thinks strategically, Dad. Not everyone gets emotionally attached to wood and rocks." Wood and rocks. That was how she described the place where her mother had taught her to bake, where I'd carried her to bed after every childhood holiday, where Diane's ashes had been scattered beneath the apple trees. I should have corrected her then. Instead, I told myself grief made people speak carelessly. Caroline and Preston became engaged 18 months after meeting. They announced it through a professional photo shoot at a vineyard near Dahlonega. I found out 5 minutes before the photographs appeared online because Caroline texted, "Big news. Please act surprised when relatives call." I stared at the message, then congratulated her. She said the wedding would be intimate and probably happen the following spring. I offered Willow Ridge. I imagined building an arbor near the lake and walking my daughter down the path Diane had planted with hydrangeas. Caroline hesitated. Preston's family has expectations, she said. The lodge is beautiful, but not really our aesthetic. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She was not. The wedding plans remained secretive, but the bills did not. Caroline asked me for a $12,000 photography deposit and later $20,000 toward catering. I paid, still hoping my place in the ceremony would eventually appear. The first unmistakable warning came when Rebecca called to ask whether my tuxedo had been fitted. What tuxedo? I asked. Silence. She assumed Caroline had told me the wedding date. It was 6 weeks away at a restored plantation property outside Savannah. Rebecca tried to recover, saying perhaps Caroline wanted to surprise me. I called my daughter immediately. She did not answer for 6 hours. Then she said the venue had limited space and Preston's family had taken most of the guest list. I am your father. I know. Am I invited? Another silence. We thought it might be too difficult without Mom. For whom? For everyone. Caroline, are you asking me not to attend your wedding? I am asking you not to turn it into a grief event. I sat in my bungalow kitchen staring at Diane's old recipe box. I paid the photographer, and we appreciate it. I paid part of the catering. I offered as your father. Her voice hardened. This is exactly why Preston said involving money was dangerous. You think helping buys access. The sentence was so precise that I knew it had been discussed before she said it. No, I replied. I think being your father should have earned an invitation without payment. She began crying and accused me of making her special day about myself. I apologized. That is the part I regret most. Not paying, not even missing the warning signs. I apologized for being hurt because her tears made me feel cruel. A week before the wedding, Caroline texted that she loved me and hoped we could celebrate privately later. I did not respond. On the wedding day, I drove to Willow Ridge alone. I sat on the dock with black coffee while my daughter married 5 hours away. At 2 in the afternoon, a florist posted photographs. There were not 40 guests, as Caroline had implied. There were more than 100. Preston's father walked her down the aisle. I enlarged the image until his hand on her arm filled my phone screen. Behind them, a chair in the front row held a framed photograph of Diane. My dead wife had been invited as decoration. I had not been invited as a person. I closed the phone and sat until the mountain shadows crossed the lake. When I returned home, I found a message from Caroline saying the ceremony had been beautiful and asking whether I could send the remaining catering payment before Monday. I did not answer. The next morning, I canceled the unpaid portion directly with the vendor. Caroline called within 15 minutes. She did not ask how I felt. She said the resort would charge her card. Then pay it, I replied. Dad, this is our wedding weekend. I am aware. You promised. I promised to help with a wedding where I believed I was welcome. You are punishing me because I protected my peace. No. I stopped paying for the event that erased me. Preston took the phone. He spoke in the measured tone he used when trying to sound more reasonable than everyone else. Walter, emotions are high. Let us not damage the relationship over one day. One day revealed the relationship. Caroline made a difficult choice. Then she can carry the cost of it. He said they would call after the honeymoon. They did not call for 4 days. I learned they were married through a Facebook notification announcing Caroline Bennett had become Caroline Hale. The first direct call came after relatives began asking why I had not attended. Caroline said the wedding had been more complicated than expected and asked me not to embarrass her by telling people I had been excluded. What should I say? I asked. Say you were not feeling well. I was healthy enough to pay. She hung up. After a month of silence, Caroline began checking on my health, the roof, the insurance, and my long-term plans. The affection felt rehearsed. They were circling Willow Ridge. The clearest sign came through social media. Caroline posted a carousel of childhood photographs from Willow Ridge with the caption, "Dreaming about restoring our family lake home for the next generation." One image showed her and Preston standing on the dock during their engagement year. A friend commented, "Cannot wait for Hale House weddings." Caroline replied with 3 heart emojis. I called her. What is Hale House? Just an idea. Using my house? Our family house. It belongs to me, for now. That phrase ended the conversation inside me, even though I remained on the line. For now, 2 weeks later, they arrived unannounced at my bungalow carrying coffee, pastries, and a leather portfolio. Caroline hugged me too tightly. Preston complimented the porch. They spent 20 minutes discussing traffic and autumn leaves before opening the portfolio. Inside were renderings of Willow Ridge transformed into a luxury wedding venue. The workshop converted into a cocktail hall, the guest cottage redesigned as a bridal suite, the apple orchard cut back for parking, and the dock extended for ceremonies. Diane's hydrangea path had been removed because, according to Preston, it restricted guest flow. We have already spoken to a designer, Caroline said. You spoke to someone about changing my property? Only conceptually. Preston leaned forward. Walter, this could become a legacy business. Caroline understands events. I understand hospitality assets. You already own the most difficult piece. The land. Exactly. What do you want from me? Caroline touched my arm. We want you to transfer Willow Ridge before the end of the year. You can keep using the guest cottage whenever you like. I looked at my daughter's hand on my sleeve. You would allow me to visit my own home? That is not what I meant. What did you mean? Her face tightened. Dad, you have had your life. You build everything. Preston and I are trying to build ours. Then build it. Why should we start from nothing when this is already family property? It is my property. I am your only child. That is biology, not a deed. Preston said I was becoming defensive. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. Mom would want me to have it. The room went still. Preston looked away, which told me even he knew she had crossed a line. Do not use your mother as a witness for something she never said. She built that place for family. She built it with me. She also believed gratitude mattered. Caroline stood. You owe me something after making me grow up without her. I stared at her. Diane had died when Caroline was 32. She had not grown up without her. But the sentence revealed how fully she had rewritten pain into entitlement. I did not take your mother from you. You kept the property. You kept all of it. Because it was our home. It should come to me. Someday is not today. She began crying. Preston closed the portfolio and said we should revisit the discussion when everyone was calmer. I walked them to the door. Before leaving, Caroline said, Thanksgiving is at Willow Ridge this year. We already invited everyone. You invited people to my property without asking? We assumed you would want the family together. Do not assume access again. Her expression changed from hurt to anger. You are punishing me for the wedding. I am learning from it. After they left, I drove to Willow Ridge. The lodge smelled like cedar, cold stone, and the faint cinnamon scent Diane loved. I walked through every room slowly. Caroline's childhood height marks remained inside the pantry door. Diane's blue mixing bowl sat above the refrigerator. In the workshop, shavings still curled beneath a bench from the rocking chair I had been building for Rebecca's first grandchild. I imagined cocktail tables replacing the tools, strangers photographing champagne beside the workbench where I had taught Caroline to use a hand plane. Then I imagined something else. Years earlier, Diane and I had quietly supported a nonprofit in Asheville called Blue Ridge Landing. It provided temporary housing, job training, and mentoring for young adults aging out of foster care. Diane began volunteering after meeting a 19-year-old woman at the hospital who had nowhere to go after discharge. She came home furious that adulthood could arrive on someone's 18th birthday like an eviction notice. We paid for hotel rooms, work boots, community college fees, and eventually helped fund a small transitional house. After Diane died, I stopped volunteering. Grief made generosity feel like a room where her voice echoed too loudly. But I never stopped donating. Blue Ridge Landing needed housing for young adults entering construction and hospitality programs. Willow Ridge already had bedrooms, a cottage, and a working shop. I called Marcus. He had grown from a homeless apprentice into the owner of my company and a member of Blue Ridge Landing's board. I need you to tell me whether I am acting from anger, I said. He listened while I described the wedding, the calls, the renderings, and Caroline's demand. When I finished, he remained quiet. Are you asking whether giving the property away is revenge? Yes? Would you regret helping those young people if Caroline apologized tomorrow? I looked across the lake. No. Would you still believe the property should do more than become a wedding venue? Yes. Then the decision may have been revealed by anger without being created by it. That sentence settled me. With the nonprofit, I created a residential training campus that preserved the lodge, orchard, workshop, and Diane's hydrangea path. 8 young adults could live there while working, studying, and saving toward independence. I signed the final transfer on the Monday before Thanksgiving. Afterward, I sat alone on the lodge deck and cried for the first time since the wedding. I cried for Diane, for the daughter Caroline had been, for the father I had tried to become, and for the fantasy that giving a child everything prevents her from wanting more. Then I made coffee and watched the sun move across the lake. Caroline ignored my warning and organized Thanksgiving at Willow Ridge anyway. I allowed the dinner because relatives had already been invited, but announced that the property's future would be discussed afterward. 14 relatives arrived. Caroline and Preston brought wine, flowers, and the same leather portfolio. Dinner moved through football and wedding stories, while everyone avoided the fact that I had not been invited. At one point, Rebecca asked whether the wedding photographs had arrived. Caroline said the photographer had captured everyone who mattered most. Then she glanced at me and added, "Dad understands why we needed boundaries." I placed my fork down. "No, I understand that I was excluded." The table quieted. Caroline's smile tightened. "We agreed not to revisit this tonight. We agreed to nothing." Preston raised one hand. "Walter, this is a holiday. Then let us be grateful for honesty." Rebecca looked at Caroline. "You told us Walter chose not to attend. He was grieving." "I was not invited," I said. My cousin Paul frowned. "But Preston's father walked you down the aisle." Caroline's face reddened. "This is exactly the emotional scene we wanted to avoid." Marcus said. He stated one fact. Caroline turned toward me. "Are you trying to humiliate me because I asked about the property?" "No. You connected the subjects when you excluded me from your wedding, then returned asking for my home." Preston opened the portfolio. "Perhaps everyone should see what we are proposing. This is not greed. This is a business that preserves Walter's legacy." He spread the renderings across the table. Relatives leaned closer. Caroline explained guest capacity, luxury suites, event packages, and projected revenue. She spoke confidently, as if permission were a technical detail. When she finished, my Aunt Linda said, "It is beautiful, but where would Walter stay?" Caroline replied, "He has the bungalow, and we would always keep the cottage available." "When there is no bridal party," I said. Preston sighed. "You are focusing on the wrong details." "The wrong detail is apparently the owner." Caroline's voice sharpened. "Dad, stop calling yourself the owner like we are strangers. I am your daughter. And you were my daughter when you married." She stood. "How long are you going to punish me?" "I am not punishing you." "Then say yes." "No." The word entered the room cleanly. Caroline stared at me. "No to the venue? No to the transfer. No to using the lodge. No to treating my life's work as something waiting for you to collect. It comes to me eventually." "It does not." Preston went still. Caroline slowly sat down. "What does that mean?" I looked toward Marcus, then back at my daughter. "Willow Ridge now belongs to Blue Ridge Landing. Beginning in January, it will become a residential and job training campus for young adults leaving foster care." No one spoke. The fire cracked behind us. Caroline blinked several times as though refusing to understand could alter the sentence. "You gave it away?" "I gave it a purpose." "Without telling me?" "You do not own a vote in my decisions." Preston picked up one of the renderings. "This property is worth more than $2 million. That is why it can do something meaningful. You could have supported the charity without surrendering the entire asset. I have supported it for years." Caroline's chair scraped backward. "You gave my inheritance to strangers. It was never your inheritance. I am your only child, and they are young people with no parents preparing a home for them. So now orphans matter more than your daughter?" The cruelty of the sentence moved through the table. Rebecca whispered her name. Caroline began crying. "Mom would hate this." I felt the old reflex rise, the need to soften, reassure, and give something back. Then I remembered the wedding photograph, Diane's framed face in the front row, and Preston's floor plan erasing her hydrangeas. "Your mother supported Blue Ridge Landing," I said. "She volunteered there. She helped young people find work and housing. The program will carry her name." Carolyn looked stunned. "You never told me. You never asked what we supported. You asked what you would receive." Preston stood. His composure had finally cracked. There must be a way to reverse this. There is not. You were emotionally distressed. I was clear. We had an understanding. You brought coffee and renderings. That is not an understanding. He began discussing valuations, taxes, and options. I raised one hand. This is not a negotiation. Caroline turned to Marcus. Did you help him do this? I helped him decide whether the idea came from anger, Marcus replied. And? I asked whether he would regret helping these young adults if you apologized. He said no. You are not family. Marcus's expression remained calm. Your father gave me a job when I was sleeping in my car. Diane gave me dinner without asking how I planned to repay it. They became family before I knew how to deserve it. Caroline looked around the table for support. No one offered the outrage she expected. Rebecca wiped tears from her face. Paul studied the floor plans. Linda said quietly, Caroline, you cannot demand someone's property and call his refusal betrayal. You do not understand. I understand he was not invited to your wedding. It was my decision. Yes, I said. And this is mine. She asked whether I loved her. The question came exactly as it had throughout her childhood whenever consequences appeared. I answered differently this time. I love you. I do not owe you Willow Ridge. Then what do I get? The room became painfully still. I looked at her for a long moment. A father who is alive, willing to speak with you, and no longer willing to be treated like an estate. She covered her mouth and left the table. Preston followed after gathering the renderings. At the doorway, he turned and said I had destroyed my relationship with my only child. No, I replied. I stopped financing the version where my value began after death. Their SUV disappeared down the gravel road. Nobody applauded. After they left, Thanksgiving continued in strained silence. Marcus washed dishes while Rebecca apologized for believing Caroline's version of the wedding. The next morning, Caroline posted that her deepest betrayal came from a parent. I answered privately that I would discuss our relationship only when she could speak about me as a person rather than a resource. She blocked me. For 4 months, we had no contact. By March, the first 8 residents arrived carrying mismatched bags and careful expressions. The lodge remained recognizable, and Diane's blue bowl stayed in the kitchen beside a note about the woman who inspired the program. I stood on the porch while Marcus welcomed them. Nobody knew what to say to me. I did not want gratitude. I wanted them to have keys. A young man named Andre asked whether the workshop was truly available for training. That is why it is still a workshop, I said. His face lit up. In that moment, every rendering Preston had created disappeared from my mind. Willow Ridge was not being lost. It was becoming useful without requiring anyone to call me Dad. Caroline called 2 weeks later from an unknown number. I nearly let it ring out, then answered. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I visited the lodge. Did someone invite you? Marcus did. I made a note to discuss boundaries with him, then waited. There is a girl living in my old room, she said. Her name is Kayla. I know. She showed me the acceptance letter for her program. She had it taped above the desk. Caroline began crying. I wanted to hate her. Did you? No, that made it worse. I sat on my porch with the phone against my ear. Why did you go? To prove you had ruined it. And you did not. Silence stretched between us. Then she said, I was cruel at Thanksgiving. Yes. I was cruel before Thanksgiving. Yes. Preston kept saying the lodge was wasted. I started believing that wanting it was the same as protecting it. You also excluded me from your wedding. Her breathing changed. I was ashamed of you. The honesty hurt more cleanly than excuses. Why? Preston's family is polished. They talk about investments, travel, and private clubs. You wear work boots to dinner and tell long stories about wood joints. I thought you would make me look small. I looked at my hands scarred by tools and time. So you replaced me with his father. Yes. And used your mother's photograph. She sobbed. Yes. Then asked me to fund the event. Yes. I let every answer remain where she placed it. I am sorry, Dad. For losing the house, for treating you like the house. That sentence opened something in me, but not enough to erase the boundary. An apology is a beginning, I said. It is not a key. I know. Do you? I am trying. Preston did not share her change. Their marriage began struggling after the property plan disappeared. Caroline discovered he had already spoken to potential investors and included Willow Ridge in presentations. He accused her of failing to manage me. She accused him of encouraging her entitlement. Both accusations held truth. They entered counseling. I did not participate. Their marriage was theirs to repair or end. Caroline rebuilt contacts slowly. She called without asking for money, volunteered without authority, and learned residents' names. Months later, she cried at Kayla's certification ceremony and admitted, "She is not a stranger anymore." Willow Ridge now houses young adults year-round. The workshop runs paid training in cabinetry, maintenance, and basic construction. Local hotels provide internships. Residents contribute a modest amount after employment, save toward independent housing, and remain connected to mentors after leaving. The program is called Diane's Landing. Her name appears on a simple wooden sign near the hydrangea path, not because I wanted to turn grief into branding, but because she had believed young people deserve somewhere safe to become adults. I still visit once a week. I teach basic woodworking and occasionally repair things nobody asked me to repair. The residents call me Walter, not Mr. Bennett, which I prefer. Caroline and I are not the family we once pretended to be. We are something smaller and more honest. She has never again asked about my will. She knows my remaining estate will support Diane's Landing and several personal gifts. I no longer explain every detail. Transparency is not the same as surrendering control. Preston visits rarely. He remains polite and uncomfortable around me. I do not seek his approval. Carolyn once asked whether I would ever forgive him. Forgiveness is not the same as trust, I said. I can release the anger without giving him another portfolio. She laughed, then cried because the joke carried too much truth. The wedding photograph now reminds me when I stopped buying relevance. Years of paying had made my support predictable and my feelings optional. Changing the pattern required more than anger at Caroline. It required ending my own habit of rescuing her. The most satisfying part of this story is not that Caroline lost a lake house. She never owned it. The satisfying part is that Willow Ridge became a home for young people who had spent their lives hearing that every place was temporary. It still holds family dinners, arguments, birthdays, tears, and muddy shoes. They simply belong to a wider definition of family than blood. Caroline once told me she thought inheritance was proof that parents believed their children mattered. I told her the greatest thing I can leave you is the understanding that you matter without receiving everything I built. She did not like the answer at first. She understands it better now. I am 70 today. I still live in the bungalow. I still drink coffee on the porch and wear work boots to restaurants that would prefer polished shoes. My daughter calls every Sunday. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes. Sometimes we talk for an hour. If she misses a week, I do not transfer money to remind her I exist. I have learned that love should survive silence without requiring payment. For anyone who has spent a lifetime providing for family, remember this. Generosity is a gift, not a contract that turns your children into owners of your future. You are allowed to decide what your work means. You are allowed to give property to a cause, sell it, live in it, or leave it empty. Your age does not convert your life into a waiting room for someone else's inheritance. And if the people closest to you begin speaking about your belongings more warmly than they speak about you, listen carefully. Sometimes the boundary that saves a relationship is the same boundary that costs them the asset they valued more than the person. So tell me honestly, if your only child excluded you from her wedding, then returned expecting the home you built with your late spouse, would a sincere apology eventually earn her closeness again, or would that betrayal permanently change what she deserved to inherit from you?